If you want to find easy second citizenships to get and make your life easier, there are 6 things that you should know. Someone left a comment here on the channel and he said, I'm not a fan of Caribbean citizenships. Him speaking. I got my permanent residence in Panama, and just dealing with the government there and specifically the banks has been a major hassle. I would rather a well-functioning country with less discretion in the hands of bureaucrats, if that's at all possible to find. And I'm going to break that down for you because I think there's a lot here we can use to help you get your second passport. If it's your first time here, I'm Andrew Henderson, the founder of Nomad Capitalist. We help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally reduce their taxes, protect their assets, increase their freedom, and grow their opportunities overseas. And so the first thing that you want to understand is there's a big difference between residence, of which there's temporary residence, there's permanent residence. People would throw in digital nomad visas. They'll throw in kind of glorified tourist visas like the Thai Elite, like a long-term tourist visa, and citizenship. And so for me, if I'm focusing on my first step to freedom, I want to get some kind of citizenship if I can afford it. Certainly you can get citizenship by getting a residence permit, living there, or in some cases even not living there. We call it paper residence, and you can work towards that 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now. But I want citizenship, okay? And so what you want to understand about a country like Panama, for example, is just because you can apply for citizenship through naturalization doesn't mean you're going to actually get it. You will see countries that say, hey, come and become our resident, and after 5 years you can apply for citizenship. You can apply for a lot of things. You can apply for a credit card, you can apply for a lottery ticket, you can apply for a date with a supermodel. Doesn't mean you're going to get it. And so understand the likelihood of naturalization. I was one of the ones who said, and I took a lot of heat for it a number of years ago, that Uruguay, for example, is not going to naturalize folks who just live there part-time. If you're living there on a very nominal basis, that's just not going to lead to citizenship. And so if you're looking at turning a residence permit into citizenship because you don't want to spend the money to get citizenship by investment, you don't want to go through a fast-track naturalization procedure, you don't qualify for citizenship by descent, you're understanding there is some risk that when you're applying for citizenship, you're not going to get it. And in Panama, we know pretty much everybody that's applied for citizenship hasn't gotten it. I know a Panamanian citizen because they were born there. Their parents happened to be living in Panama where they got it. And so that's maybe the easiest way to get it. But understand the difference between permanent residence, and that permanent residence isn't all residents, and other citizenships. Here's a person saying, I'm not a fan of paying for a donation to get a Caribbean citizenship by investment in a matter of months. And instead, he got a permanent residence in Panama. It's almost kind of a non sequitur because Panama is 5 years, and you'll be waiting 15 years before they still don't give you citizenship. You could have had the citizenship in 6 months, and dual citizenship means you're in control. You have options. Your country doesn't own you. If they do something you don't like, you could always walk away. The second thing I want you to understand is that setting up certain residence and citizenship programs can be a hassle. Some are worse than others, and that includes banks. And so this gentleman went to Panama and had to set up a bank account to get the Panama Friendly Nations visa. They've increased the requirements to do that. And so, yeah, understand, you're going to be asked some questions. Why are you coming to open a bank account? If someone like Nomad Capitalist handles it for you, you'll probably be asked fewer questions. The process will be more streamlined, but you're still going to be asked some questions. There are still going to be some hassles. A bank is still a bank is still a bank. There are banks that are better, but some of my favorite banks, like in Singapore, you don't get residence by simply opening a bank account there, right? And so the banks that you want for banking purposes aren't going to be the banks where it's like, all right, put 50 grand, put 100 grand, put whatever it is in this bank, get residence. Those banks may be more difficult. And so understand that even if you're doing citizenship by investment in the Caribbean, the bank is going to check your money, in some cases even before you can start the procedure. And so you're going to be dealing with banks. That's going to be some kind of a hassle. There's always going to be hiccups. Who you work with is obviously going to make that easier or not easier. The third thing to know is that you don't always want to use the things that you set up to get permanent residence. So here's a guy who said, I opened up a bank account in Panama to get permanent residence. In some of these countries, you can't actually use the money that you deposit, but in some other countries that you can. And what I want you to understand is that a bank account, again, that you set up, or a real estate purchase, or whatever it is that you're doing, an investment, for the purpose of getting residence or citizenship isn't the same as doing it for the sake of getting it. I like to do things for the purpose that they're intended for. And so if I'm looking for a bank account because I just need a bank account, I'm going to go to the place with the best bank account. So if I don't have a lot of money to put in, I'll go to a place like Georgia because they've got decent user interface. It's relatively straightforward to open. It's relatively respected in the grand scheme of things. That's pretty straightforward. If I have more money, I'll go to Singapore. If I want to make investments in my bank account, maybe I'll go to Switzerland or the UK or the Bahamas or the Caymans or something like that. And so if I'm opening a bank account for a residence permit, I wouldn't expect to use that bank account. right? And so if I got a bank account in Thailand, I put the 10 million Thai baht in, which is at a discount right now with the strong dollar, I wouldn't top that up and like use that just for giggles, because that's a bank that I did not choose for banking purposes. I chose it because it got me a residence permit. Now, I'm not saying choose the worst bank. I mean, in Thailand, you've got 2 or 3 bigger banks that are generally usable, but if you're not choosing it for the sake of I'm getting great service and they understand what I want and they have great investment options, just let it be there. And what I would do is say, I'm going to put 10 million Thai baht, it's about 270,000 US dollars, in the bank account, and just know that money's earning whatever the interest rate is. Maybe it's 1% right now, because interest rates in some of these countries haven't caught up. And I'm going to look at that as kind of an opportunity cost for getting the residence permit that I want. And so if Thailand's a place that I would like to live, or would like to live part-time, for example, or would like the option to live in the future, I want to just secure that residence permit while the Thai baht is low, I'm going to look at that as, okay, that's a price that I'm paying. I'm diversifying my portfolio. That's money that I had in the bank that's now in a bank in a different country, so that I have some diversification. I have currency diversification. I have some asset protection built in at a lower level. And that's the price that I'm paying for access to that country, rather than trying to make everything work for me when it's going to be too much of a hassle. Because as this guy's saying, you try and work with a Panamanian bank, they're a pain in the tuchus. If I'm doing a Panamanian residence permit that requires a bank account, I'm putting the money there and that's it. And I'm going to accept that opportunity cost as the price of I want that access to Panama, whether I'm going to live there 1 day a year or 365 days a year. Panama and Thailand, very tax-friendly countries. And so the opportunity cost if you live there and become a tax resident is very nominal in comparison to what you were paying in Canada or Australia or Germany or the Netherlands or wherever you're coming from. The cost of tying up $100 or $250 or $300,000 to save hundreds of thousands in tax and have a place that you want to live is nominal. Stop forcing everything to be useful for purposes that you didn't choose it for. Choose a bank, choose an investment, choose whatever that you want for its own purpose, and take the ancillary things that come with that as just things to be set aside as an opportunity cost. The fourth thing that I want you to know is that countries, he mentions discretion, okay? And this is one thing that you want to be aware of. Some countries that have less discretion are the more formal ones. And so when I've been asked, like, hey, what's the best citizenship? I'm from India, I'm from Pakistan, I'm from, some country that maybe isn't seen as high level by some countries. Every country has a view of where their place in the world is. And if you're above that, what your passport is, then I think your life will generally be very easy. If you're below that, then your life won't be very easy. Some countries are just very non-judgmental and they don't really care. But if I'm coming from, let's say, South Asia, my advice probably would be to go to some European country, because they're going to play more by the rules. There's not going to be some bureaucrat in a bad mood. And I would say probably the further north you go, the more likely it is. If you have a US passport or a Canadian passport, you can go to a country where they've been historically a bit more fickle. You can go to a place like, let's say, in Georgia. Lika, in our mini-series on Georgia, talked about residence permits. And there was a time when people were being rejected for residence permits, and what would actually happen, and I think they've largely cleared it up now, but what would happen is if you're from China and you come on a 30-day visa, they would give you, you need to come back in 35 days and collect your residence permit. Oh, you can't do that, ha ha ha. Peru is known, and we talked about this for years. This is why we do R&D work, to actually figure out how things really work, not just what they say. The law says one investment amount, but in reality they want a much higher investment amount. Portugal's self-sufficient visa, it's technically like 700 euros a month. You actually need to have a lot more than that generally if you want to get approved. And we've seen other examples of that around the world. So certain countries have more discretion. Those are the countries where you're going to have less bureaucracy generally, because once you're in, and there are countries where things are just less formal. The reality is some of those bureaucrats are able to kind of bend things based on soft policies in the country. That's unfortunate getting in, but if you can survive that, then generally you'll have a less bureaucratic experience in the country, as odd as that may sound, okay? And so if you just want things to go exactly by the book, move to Norway. I'm not saying you want to twist or bend the rules. I'm saying that the governments may take more liberties in countries where they have more discretion, where things are less formal. But then once you're in, things are less formal. And so you might decide, I want to have some combination of both. The challenge is, in those places where things are extremely by the book, you're going to pay probably higher taxes in most cases. I mean, Singapore is an example of where that may not be the case, but they're not really granting permanent residence or certainly not citizenship in Singapore anymore. So if you're trying to use it as a flag, it's a place to live, they'll be by the book, but you're not going to be able to, even in that country, work your way all the way up. This is one reason why I say get into countries that are growing and moving in the right direction early before they raise their sights too high and make too many demands. The fifth thing that I would say is you're going to be asked questions. So he's saying, oh, the bureaucrats, the people at the bank, they were asking questions. That's going to happen. I think any of us who became successful have just a smidge of kind of narcissistic tendencies, like, why are you asking me these questions? Questions don't necessarily equal discretion, right? You answer the questions. I think the worst thing you can do when being asked these questions is get upset while you're being asked the questions. And I've seen that firsthand. I learned that lesson many years ago. When a bureaucrat or a banker asks you questions, they just want an honest answer. You want to understand, how you're presenting yourself and what you're telling people, and answer honestly. And the idea that people are asking you questions doesn't mean things are going poorly. And so understand that's going to be the case. There's going to be some understanding. I can tell you, as someone who gave up U.S. citizenship, there's certain parts of the world I go to, they're like, but it says in your passport, U.S., like, what happened? I can't tell you how many times I crossed through the Armenian border, and they're like, they literally had a scan of my U.S. passport, like, it's still valid. I'm like, yeah, it's valid and it's in a shredder somewhere in Washington. They're like, no, who would do that? I'm like, I would do that. They're like, it's impossible. No one gives up U.S. citizenship. So, you have to be prepared for some of those situations. The more unique your lifestyle, the more questions you're going to have, and you'll start to bring around supporting documentation. So I carry a copy of a certificate of loss of nationality from the U.S. I keep it on my phone. And so if I go to a bank or if I go somewhere where they're like, why aren't you American? I'm like, here's why I'm not American. But don't look at that as there's a problem. The sixth thing is that you want to stop demanding everything from one place. And so I told you about a conversation I had with someone who's kind of starting out on their journey recently, where their goals were they wanted an easy permanent residence in a country, not even really understanding what permanent residence is. Temporary residence, in many cases, is just as good to working towards citizenship or spending time in a country. Low taxes, good weather, and a path to citizenship. You want to start to split up your needs into different places. If you want to live in Singapore, that may be a great place to have low taxes, especially if you're an investor. The weather's pretty good if you like tropical weather. You can get in. They're by the book. If you have the money, if you have the skills, if you have whatever it is, the criteria for the residence program you're going for, they're going to let you in. Same with a lot of countries. If you meet the criteria in Dubai, start a company, in you come. Into the UAE you come. Malaysia, many other countries, they're going to be by the book. Those are not necessarily, in Asia, good countries to be on a path to citizenship. So get your citizenship somewhere else. So I go back to the original commenter. I got my permanent residence in Panama. If you want to live in Panama, get permanent residence in Panama. But I wouldn't dismiss a Caribbean citizenship, because if you think you're going to get citizenship in Panama, that's not going to help you. For certain people, like if you're Dutch, for example, and you can't have dual citizenship, I would still want to be working towards some kind of second passport on a certain timeline. You don't have to claim a second passport. If you've lived in a country 5 years and you don't want citizenship, I mean, there's people who have lived in the United States for 30 years on a green card. They could have applied for citizenship eons ago, and they choose not to. But they can now, as long as that residence is still active. And so if you are not allowed to have dual citizenship, but you think in some point in the future you might be able to, then I would still want the clock ticking on something where I could get citizenship, right? I'm not going to go and get a Caribbean citizenship if I'm Dutch, unless I want to give up my Dutch nationality. They're going to force me to do that. But for the rest of us who can have dual and multiple citizenships, if I want to live in Panama, I would still get a second passport in, let's say, a Caribbean country, in Turkey, in anywhere where I can, Malta, for example. And I am going to separate where I want to live from where I want to be a citizen. I'm going to stop demanding that one country serve all of my needs. The country where I live, sure, I want it to be easy enough to get a residence permit. I'd like it to have the weather that I like, and you can dictate what that is. For some folks, it's Ireland. For some folks, it's Singapore. That country, of course, if you live there full time, is going to have low taxes. If you don't live there full time, if you don't trigger tax residence, then the taxes are irrelevant. That's why when I say spend time in Colombia, I don't spend that much time in Colombia to where I'm never going to be a Colombian taxpayer. So whatever the Colombian taxes are, don't bother me unless they start taxing property. Which, okay, they do tax property. I pay $700 a year, and it's not the end of the world. The property goes up in value. But on the citizenship front, I'm not going to rely on those countries to get citizenship. And so don't demand everything from one place. Be willing to answer some questions and understand that the ability to get citizenship doesn't mean you necessarily will. I want people to start splitting what they're doing into multiple things and stop trying to make like every bank account they get work. Allow that some things serve a purpose that may not be an all-encompassing purpose. And I think you'll be a lot happier when you're working towards second residence and second citizenship.